Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to this week's xEssentials presentation. And the topic tonight is xLights 2019, The Death of Start Channels. It's an exciting presentation that was given at this year's Christmas Expo in Daytona. So for those that missed the presentation, Scott has generously offered to present tonight. So presentation, from what I understand, is relatively short, 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. So I want to. So one of the big goals with xLights coming forward is we want to make it a lot easier for users. So one of the big things that we have found is very difficult for new users to understand is start channels and things related to that. So kind of our envision to the future and what we have in there for this year, and hopefully will improve in future years, is to the users will no longer need to worry about start channels. So the first thing first that I want to get out there is this does not mean the old way is not going to work anymore. We're not going to make people switch to this new way. You can cling on to your old universal or absolute start channeling if you want to. That's fine. The intent of the new kind of way that you can do start channels is to make it easier for people getting started and kind of change the thought process where you don't have to think about channeling or start channels. You just think about models and props and controllers. So it's an alternative way to do things, but you can still do things the old way. So I guess the biggest problem, in my opinion, for new users is, what is a start channel? Why do I have to set start channels? There's a lot of people have overlapping start channels. There's lots of issues that arise from this concept that is really from the old lore days where you had to set start channels for each prop and everything, where in xLights we don't really need to worry about that as much. So as I said, what's the whole point of start channels? So in newer versions of xLights, since version about 30 of this year, there's an option where you can actually do auto start channels. So this kind of grew out of the concept of the ZCPP protocol, where you just set what prop is on what port, and xLights will rearrange your props and automatically increment your start channels and set everything based on your settings. So that's what it was kind of originally written for. And then myself and Dan and Keith then also implemented it now for E131 and DDP. So when you do ZCPP, it's a little bit easier because it'll auto-config the controller, but like E131 and DDP, you still have to upload to the controller manually once you get your channels set. And there are some things that are required when you do this auto start channel. You have to have a description of your controller, because there's this concept of, we want you to describe your controllers. And that's the setup tab is basically now more of a controller level, not a channel level. So I just want to this is kind of, if you look in the E131 setup tab in the setup screen, if you look, there's some more options that have been added recently. So you can actually, it's kind of required that you put a description for your controller, and you can actually set your controller type. And then there's also this option that let use auto start channels. And this will get you into this kind of easy mode. So another thing that kind of has been added to make it a little bit easier, it's not the same as auto start channels, but you can also do start channels by controller names. And it's very similar, where instead of using a universe, you can just use the name of your description. So that's also in there. So I kind of want to go into just show xLights and kind of show the thought process on behind how we want this to function in the future, and how, if you're a relatively new user, this might be a way that you could try it your first year and see if it works for you. And if you want to also convert your show, this is a way you could do it going forward. So if you look in the newest version, there's been this discovery button now, and in the setup tab, we kind of want to have every line now be one controller. So based on your controller type, so you can do this discovery mode here, and xLights in the background will automatically try to find ZCPP controllers. The DDP also supports the discovery protocol, so if you have like FPP based controllers, they should all show up. So I hit discover, and I have a Falcon plugged in, and it found that as ZCPP. And then I have a Raspberry Pi that's my main controller it found, which I really don't want to use as a controller. This is my show player. Oh, sorry. Let me do that again. Sorry. So the first one is actually it's a controller from Dan. It's an F8. It has 16 outputs on it. And then these are my show Pi, which I really don't want to show up in here. And then the bottom one is the ZCPP. So if you open up this first controller, you can do a couple of things. So by default, it does not support it does not enable the auto start channel. So you can enable that. And it's kind of critical to put a name in here. By default, it just uses the host name, which in my FPP instance right now, I just have the default FPP, but I could say this is like FPP house, right, or something. And the number of channels, this is something you normally want to set rather high, because this is still where we need to do some improvements. If you go over the number of channels you have, xLights kind of falls on its face. So that's something we know that we need to improve. But so now that I've set up, and so the ZCPP in here does have the auto sizing, so that's a little bit better than the DDP where I actually had to manually set the size. This you just set to 1 and it'll automatically resize. Some people don't like that option because then if you have things after that, it'll push it, it'll change the channel numbers, and then you may have to like re-upload a lot of configurations. So it's something to be aware of with the auto size option. So this is kind of the concept here. We just want one line per controller. So these are my two controllers. And then now when I go to set up my show in my layout tab, if I draw a mega tree, you would just set up your properties like normal, and you could still use the start channel mode that's in there, and you can set your channel, do your universe, or you could do it by controller if you wanted to, or you can do this newer mode. And so instead of using start channel, you can just say it's on a controller. It'll turn red to tell you what port it's on, and I can just say port 1. So if you look at it based on my settings, it kind of just put it on the first one here, and it'll calculate the start channels for you. So if I want to add something else, so let's go with arches. And I want to put these on my Falcon. It'll go red because it wants to know a controller port. And it'll automatically know that this is on that controller and push it off. Well, that's how it's always been. But what if I wanted to actually say, no, this tree is only 8. And I actually wanted to start on port, let's say 2. And I wanted to put something else in front of it. I have a wreath. And I want that on I want that to be on that same controller, but I want that to be on port 1. So if you actually look what it did is now when I put that, it reshuffled the channels and put that wreath before the tree and shifted it down. It did it all kind of automatically, but you can see it's 1 to 150 and then 151. So the whole concept is when I draw my show here, I can do a more like logical layout in my mind. I just care where this is going to be on my controller. It's going to be on port 1. And now when I do that, since I already have something on port 1, it'll it'll daisy chain it after that. So the first one on here is circles. That's at the beginning of the chain. Now the second one is star. And you can change this order. So if you put it at the beginning, it's going to give me an error now because this one's also at the beginning. So now I have to put that one after the star. And if you see what it did, it changed the start channels and reordered them. So it's kind of a more logical way that you don't really have to care about the start channels. So I have this third star. Let's say I also want that on port 1. And I want the start channel to be, and now it'll just daisy chain it after the circle. So if you actually look at this, now I have star, circle, star 2. And if that gets kind of confusing, you can actually go back to the layout tab. And there's a new option in here where you can actually do visualize controller. And so I right clicked on it and did visualize controller. Sorry, I was kind of fast at it. But in here now, you can actually see the ports on your controller and it'll tell you how you have it wired. So on the first port, I had star, circle, star, and then I had the tree on ports 2 through 50. So there's also some options to print this as a picture or export it to a CSV that'll open in Excel. So then you can kind of do what you want with it. In the future, we do plan to have this more like drag and droppable. So maybe you won't have to actually set all the channel layouts in the layout screen as manually as it is currently. So that's kind of the concept behind it. So at this point, the ZCPP controller, when I output to license, would automatically just output to it. But the DDP, it does not support it. So I would have to manually upload this config to it. So all I should have to do then at this point is I right-clicked, uploaded it, and this is the FPP controller. So if you look on the first, I had star, circle, star, and then I had the tree on the next 8 ports, which would put it onto one of the differential ports, which isn't really logical, but just kind of showing that for a demo. But so you can do that with DDP. ZCPP also supports that, but kind of the big thorn in ZCPP right now is it's not supported in FPP. So actually, in the newest version that isn't out yet, there'd be a way to convert this, but kind of right now you have to do it manually. But if I wanted to put my Falcon, and I could still use it in E131 mode as I always have. Since it doesn't have the auto size option like ZCPP, you kind of just have to put the universe as high. And I can put this as house left per se. And you can also do this. So use this auto start option. And then also there's this option to select what type of controller it is. So when I did the discovery, it kind of automatically did it for me. But since I'm manually setting it up, I have to select what that is. So if you can tell as the DDP one here, it put the controller type where I had to manually select it. So now if I go back, it gives me an error because this controller doesn't exist anymore. And it just defaults back to the start channel when that happens. But now I can set that on my Falcon. And this should be all good to go. And even in here, if I change the order of these, just for kicks, if you go back to the layout tab, it reordered the start channels and now it put those in front. So, and kind of the power of this now is, so let's say in E131, I wanted to do, let's do number of arches 10. Let's not do that many. Let's draw some more arches. Put those also on there. Let's put these on port 2. What did I do wrong? Forgot to hit tab. So similarly now I can go back, do the same visualize controller, and it will show what I just put on that controller. And I can also do upload to controller on a Falcon because it's in an E131 mode. I have to do the inputs like normal. And I also have to then do the outputs. And then I should be able to go to my Falcon here. And it automatically uploaded the universe and channel configs for me. I didn't even set the start channels are in here. They make kind of sense, but I didn't really set them. These are all red because I didn't use those ports, and this must have had a configuration before. But it also did all the input defines 40 universes I set there. So the whole concept behind this is also, so like if you had a SAN device, you could set those. Any of the upload to controller types that we support, this makes it kind of an easy way where you don't have to think about the start channels, and xLights will just push the configuration everywhere. So the next step, I guess, is if I had Fpp Connect. So the bottom one here is my show player. It comes up as 2 because I have my internal show network and my subnet for my house network. So you should be, in theory, now be able to, we'll just select one. And the UDP out, this is basically will upload all the configuration. So your E131 outputs, your DDP outputs, and everything to this Fpp instance. So now if I do upload, and if I go to my Fpp instance, you'll see the 2 controllers. So this is my Falcon, and that's my SAN device that I have set up as DDP. So that's kind of the basics behind it. If anyone has any questions or wants me to show more about it or explain it in more detail, I'll be happy to take questions.
What if your mega tree spans more than one port?
So like 2 through 9? Or more than one controller?
Okay, yeah, I see the 2 through 9. But since you brought up, well, yeah, what if it does more than one controller?
So across multiple controllers will not work. So if you want to do that, you're kind of in the old school method. The upload to controller auto start channel kind of has some ground rules that it assumes you're going to follow, and expanding controllers is not one of them.
Okay, Scott, if you have that 2 through 9, so it's going like one port over one side. What if you want it all on one side? Would you move it so it's 9 through 15?
So you could just do
just do it manually, or
so I want it on port 9 through 16, save.
Okay.
And then at that point you have to upload the configuration on that.
I had that problem last year, and I have six ports used for my mega tree. So Dan told me just to go and back up and do the last three in the first section and the first three in the next one. So you just started at I started it at port 6. So it went 6, 7, 8 on the left side and then 9, 10, 11 on the right side. That way I split it over my 2 power supplies.
Yeah. Yeah, I changed it through 8 through 16 there, and I just did that upload quick, or 9 through 16, and I just moved it, and it redid the channels here.
So Scott, I see in chat there's a question about what if you have lore controllers between all of this? Is there anything to take into consideration?
So you can lore and DMX should work. I have not tried it, so I will experiment on the fly here, and we'll see what happens. So yeah, if you have a lore controller, you're going to use the DMX output on your lore device or on your Falcon. You're going to use a DMX. So you would change this setting. So I'm going to have it off DMX port 3. And instead of using protocol WS2811, you can actually then go to DMX. And then down here, it will tell you the DMX channel. So this would be the first channel on your lore output universe. So this, in theory, then should put the start channel. So if you look up here, it's hard to tell, but house left is the Falcon, and it put it at the end here. So then if I put another, let's just make this a single color here. So it'll be one channel. And let's say we have another string of dumb nodes or single channel color. This is same thing. It's on my DMX port 3, unless you fat finger. And I put this as DMX. And now, if you can tell here, it's just auto incrementing the channels 1. And then if I were to, I don't need to do the inputs again because I didn't adjust that at all. But I should just be able to do the outputs here. And now if I go to my serial outputs, it changed it to universe 3.181, which I assume is, that's kind of the downfall right now. This doesn't tell you what the universe address is of that, but I assume that's what they probably are. So the intent is you can do all that configuration right here in the configuration with no other nothing else. So, sorry.
No worries. So, and my other question, Scott, is you talked about some of the rules that you have to, be within that box. Can you give any kind of guidance on what some of those rules are? Obviously we already talked about, if you're going over multiple controllers, that's not, it's not a supported rule. Are there any other rules that people should think about?
So the big rules are you can't go across multiple controllers. If you have a multi-string crop, you can't daisy chain something in the middle. So if you have a 16 string megatree, you can't put your star on 8 and expect it. It can be on the end of 16, but it cannot be at 8. And then it's not a hard rule, but if you're doing something like a matrix or a megatree, the strings all must be the same length. And if you run into a case where that's not possible, you can use a custom model, and custom models do support multiple lengths. They don't have to be the same length.
So are there any other considerations people should have for custom models, or is a custom model just the fact that it's looked at as a single model no matter what within xLights and able to configure it? Using your example of a 16-string megatree, if I had a custom model of my 16-string megatree, and in my custom model I went up to my, whatever node star, and then came back down, would that potentially work if somebody wanted to potentially do that?
So if you're trying to put another prop in the middle, that wouldn't. But if you were trying to do like a mega tree and you wanted to do 2 strings that were 300 nodes and your 4th string you wanted to only be 200 nodes, right now in the current tree that would not work. But if you convert it to a custom model, that would actually be possible by changing it. So let's kind of go over that example here. So right now it's using 8 strands. So if I tried to say, I want to do something where I only wanted 3, but then I wanted 300, and strings per strand are 3, there's no way to do 8 strands, right? It's always going to be 9. Let's put this at 180. And if I right click, do my node layout, you'd see it's 9. You can't do 8. It's impossible. So you can, what you could do is you can go into, and it's always better to use the built-in models whenever possible because of how the render buffers work. But if you have to, you can do export as a custom model. Let's just say it's in this folder. I'll call it tree. And now I can import this. And I basically have that tree. And I think Keith added this about the beginning of last year. Historically, custom models were always 1. Well, now you can actually do, I have 3. And if you do 3, it'll just divide it up evenly, like you said. They're kind of like the default. But if you do individual start nodes, you can actually say where you want them to start and end. And you can see here, it's dividing it up by 3. But if I go in and edit the model data, this is going to be gigantic. Maybe I should do this differently. Okay, let's just start over.
No, you were on the right track, Scott. You were on the right track.
Yeah, but it was just hard to edit it there if I wanted to get it down to like 800. Yeah, like if you put this as 1 string of 800, or number of strings 800, strings for strands, put this back to 8. Now if I do an export on this, and if I import it, I get this sweet sizing bug. Someone should fix. Oh, I failed miserably at it. Sorry. Wow. Oh, I didn't export it right. Aha. I need to export as a custom model. And then now if I import, yes, it'll be a custom model. So then I can do the 3 strings. And now I can say the first one, I try to do the math here, but I can say the first one is 1. The second one I want to start at 301. And this one I want to start at 601. And now if you look at the node layout, I guess it's not easy to look at the node layout. It doesn't really tell you the strings, but the first 300, then 300, and then the last 2 would be the last 2.
The important thing is if somebody's interested in using the auto configuration of your controller, you may have a little bit more setup as far as your xLights, but it's capable of performing those functions for you.
Yeah, so if you're doing a real basic like layout, like I'm gonna just put props, and you're gonna use the built-in models, and you're gonna do the wiring from like how we do it in how xLights, kind of the way we recommend, where you're not gonna do custom stuff. It'll work with most of the default models and the default configuration. And the whole idea of just setting the controllers, you don't have this double setup. Now like historically you would have to go in here and say, what's my universe 1, and kind of have this methodology of, oh, 1 universe per output unless I have a lot of props and I need 2, where now you don't have to really think about that as much. So it kind of makes it hopefully a little less steps and a little bit more easy to understand.
So I'd like to open it up to the floor. I was asking questions. Figured I would open up the floor. Does anybody else have questions? I know there's another question in chat. What is DDP versus ZCPP?
So ZCPP or ZCPP is kind of it's a protocol that Keith has been championing, and the concept behind it, DDP they're both similar, but ZCPP it sends your data that you would have for your lights, like to show your colors, but it also sends configuration data. So if I have this controller, let's just wipe this all out here. Let's go back to, can I just hit delete? Start from a clean layout. I'm crazy. Just delete everything. So if I do the discover here, it'll show up the Falcon in ZCPP mode. So in ZCPP, it has the built-in auto start channel functionality. That's where the concept kind of came, was the idea of this. So with this, I can do my mega tree, do what I did before, say it's on this, it's on port 1. And at this point, you don't have to upload the controller as I did before. When you start outputting the lights, this will actually reconfigure the Falcon. So since I was in E131 mode earlier, it's actually rebooting right now. So if you give it here a couple of seconds, I'll show the web page. But
so just kind of a quick note about that is, for anybody that has a Falcon controller, it's the F48 and the V3 that support this if you have the 2.5 firmware. If you have a V2, it's not there yet.
Yeah, I think the F4 may have, I don't know if that firmware is out there as well. But in ZCPP mode, you can basically see it shows your ports here, and it should show eventually. I think it takes like a minute. So by default, when you first, I think every second it sends out a configuration packet, which will basically tell it how to configure the channels on each port and the string count. So I don't know why. What am I doing around here? So it's showing the 100. So it's showing 150 channels, which is the 50 LEDs per string. If you do the math, it should also, I think the packet only goes out about every minute, but it'll show you your description. So I called this tree. Eventually this description field should also populate.
Scott, don't you also have to put the controller in?
I'm unsure what you mean by that.
The port number, I'm sorry, under controller description.
Oh, wow. Good call. I'm stupid, I guess. Yep, you're right. So as you could tell now, it populated the string ports, and it kind of did it all on the fly. You don't have to upload to controller. So that's the idea behind ZCPP, is it's zero config pixel protocol. It's all automatic. So as soon as, and if I have the controller hooked up, but I don't have any lights to it. Actually, when you do this, it'll actually light up the lights on your controller as you're configuring it. So if you were to change these settings, it's built into xLights. It'll automatically outload. If you output the lights on and you change, it'll actually change the values. So if you were putting if you put like a wreath down or something, you put in 50 nodes, it would light up 50 nodes on your wreath, and you could verify that you have it set up correctly. So it does all that in real time, which is kind of convenient. So that's kind of the easy mode that Keith would like to get to, and that's why he put it in there. But it's kind of, and it only is currently supported by xSchedule and xLights, and the only controller that supports it is the Falcon, and the ESP Pixel Stick also supports it if you're running the newest, some of the Travis builds, the nightly builds from the since like May. It also supports it. So the ZCPP is in there, and it works pretty good. It's just you're kind of married. You have to use xSchedule with a Falcon at this point, where if you're using like the E131 auto start channel, that will kind of work with FPP, and it'll work with any controller that you can upload configs to as well. So it's a little bit more easy. It's got a little bit more broad support. So
Scott, would you mind going back to the setup page and what you did? It was really quick, and I might have been the only one to miss it, but I'm not sure how you got that. So sorry.
So there's this new, gotta turn it, oh, dang it. Wow. The output to lights button is right where the stop share is when the bar comes down. How do I move the bar? Okay, whatever. So there's this discover button that's in here. So you can manually just add your controller if you want to, but ZCPP and DDP support a discovery type protocol. So if you know anything about networking, when you hit this discovery button, it sends out kind of a multicast packet basically on a certain port looking for controllers. And if the controllers receive that packet, they'll respond saying, hey, I'm alive, with some basic settings. So when you hit discover here, it'll go out on your network, and if you have a controller plugged in, it'll find the Falcon or the ZCPP controller that I have plugged into my network. And that's what, if you look at the IP here, that's this Falcon. And it also found this F8 I have, and it also my main FPP instance, which is not really a controller, but it kind of shows. So.
And did I have to set the Falcon in the DDP or ZCCPP mode?
No. So even in if it's in E131 mode, it'll still respond to that discovery protocol.
Okay.
That's why I kind of ran out of time today, but I have a build of it. Dan added some code now where you can actually then convert this back to E131 if you want to, if you don't want to use the ZCPP, because the discovery doesn't work with E131 type devices because that protocol doesn't support the discovery. So, but if you wanted to, you could still manually set it up if you knew the IP and all that kind of stuff this way as well. But discovery is just kind of on top of it, an easier way.
Can you piecemeal in controllers? You do the initial setup, and you've got 5 controllers online. Then you hit the lottery and decide to go add another 7 controllers. Then can you go back in and discover, and it will pull in the new 7?
Yeah, if you hit discover, it won't add them to the list. If there's already an IP or a host name in there, it won't re-add them. That's why I'm not 100% sure why it's doing it with this DDP one. It's because I think on my network I have 2 subnets, one for my show network, one for my main network, and this Pi is bridging both of them. So it actually has 2 separate IP addresses right now. So I think it thinks it's 2 different devices. If you actually, like, if I look at my Pi right now, both of these networks are connected to this computer. So it thinks there's 2 different IP addresses. So.
And if you make a mistake and you've got a 16 with an IP address of .15, and then you add another one, and it also has the same IP address for some reason, what happens when you try to discover?
So like you do the IP address wrong when you configure it, like on the FPP itself or on the controller itself.
Yep.
Well, you're gonna have network conflicts because you'll have 2 static IPs that are the same. So I'm unsure what that'll do to your like normally in a network they just both won't respond, or they won't work at all, is normally what I've seen.
So walk me through this. If in session 1 I set it up and I had 192.168.1.10. And then in the second round of setup, I accidentally had another controller that happened to be offline. You have another controller that is now online that also is .10, but the original .10 is turned off.
It's really hard to hear who's asking questions, so we're missing half the conversation here. You need to be closer to your mic or something.
Yeah, I'm trying not to pop the mic. Is that better?
A little better.
No, Joel, if you set two things as the same IP and plug them in, xLights probably won't see either of them because you'll have a low-level network conflict like in your layer 2 or layer 3. I'm not 100% sure how that exactly all works off the top of my head. But like in xLights, if you try to add two with the same IP, it won't let you right now.
Right.
But if you accidentally program two controllers and plug them in, they probably just both won't respond.
So Scott, there's a question. Sorry.
Just the discover button is making me wonder what happens if you do this and what do you get?
I'm unsure. I don't think anything will happen. Normally, when you have IP conflicts, that neither of them will respond.
So Scott in chat, it says, how would you change last year's show to this system?
So the easiest way to do it, as I did, as I just deleted all of my setup tab and started over. It's a little bit painful, but it's not terrible, I don't think.
And if last year's system worked great, no reason to update to this, right?
Yeah. So yeah, the old way will still work 100%. If you're comfortable with start channels, universes, you're a pro at it, you can keep doing it the way you've always done it. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. This is just kind of a way we're trying to change the thought process, so we're no longer doing so you don't have to think about channels. We're trying to get away from that old LOR mentality of I got to think of my channels.
So Scott, I just want to ask a quick clarifying question. When you say delete and start over, specifically you mean on the setup tab. You don't have to delete any of your props. You don't have to change your layout.
Yeah.
That's all perfectly fine. It's the setup tab specifically, correct? And then obviously there's configuration on each prop, but you don't have to redo any of that.
Yeah, so yeah, my layout, this is the same I've had for 3 years. I've just added stuff. All I did was I did like historically like most people have. I had multiple outputs per controller. This was just a ton of universes. I went through and re-added them all as these one output options. So now it just takes up 20 per type of device I have, or, instead of having every controller is kind of its own line now. And that's kind of the thought process we want to get, is every controller gets its own line instead of having tons of E131 universes and stuff like that. And then I can do this visualize type mentality where I can click on this controller, I can see what's plugged into it, I can print this, I can go give it to my brother and say, hey, go plug this into that controller. That's kind of the thought behind it, the mentality that we want to get to.
That's a great addition.
So yeah, that's what my first year I had my brother come over and try to help me, and he had no idea where to plug stuff in. And at that point, you can do the export to CSV, and when you do the export models feature, but it's still kind of messy. So that's why this visualizer I think is pretty cool, that you can do this kind of stuff. So,
Scott, is there a way to make that discover button check a different subnet instead of the subnet that your laptop's on or your computer's on?
well, in theory, if it's on a different subnet, you wouldn't be able to see it. So
I can get the controllers that's on a different subnet going from wireless to wired, but yet when I hit the discover button, it never sees it.
I think so. I'm not an expert on it, but there's the new FPP proxy stuff that's in the 3.0. And I believe if you go into your FPP, because I'm assuming you're bridging through an FPP device.
Bridging through the router.
Okay.
So the challenge with auto discovery is it uses broadcast packets. Broadcast packets don't go beyond the local subnet. the only way to detect things beyond the local subnet would be to try and scan the entire internet address space
Yeah, you
for
could.
controllers, which isn't practical.
Yeah, you could. I don't know if you could force the IP address. There's a setting for that, and then force it to whatever that other subnet is. But yeah,
Try that then.
So Scott, here's a different question. Person doesn't have a mic. They have some medium trees that have 17 verticals by 10 strands. I have a single string that zigzags at 17. Everything is great except my pixel spacing requires me to cut every other zig and add wiring or declare an extra pixel, null pixel. Is there a way to tell xLights about those null pixels?
so
I'd like to avoid all the cutting and splicing if I can.
So you can do the null pixels. I am not a proponent of that, so you can do it, but I would rather you have it cut it. But yeah, it is possible to do that. Let me go back to my waste folder a little bit here. In the controller connections, there's now other options. So by default, xLights won't override what's in your controller, the settings. But now there's these check boxes, and you can actually say check, and then you can put in your null pixel. When they're in the middle, I believe the Falcon will have to do virtual strings. And it'll get a little hairy with that. And the FPP controllers support virtual strings, but if you're using like a SAN device, I don't think you can do that as easily. But yeah, there's these options. So if you wanted to set brightness, so by default, if you already set your whole controller to 20%, I probably wouldn't come in here and set brightness, but you could come in and say, I want my tree to be 20%. Now I want my roof line to be 100%. You can change all those settings in here as well and override whatever you already set in the controller. So.
Okay. Someone's asking where they can update their Falcon firmware. And I assume that's on the controller.com website.
Yeah, if you go to Pixel
Controller.
Pixel Controller, it's under his support page.
Somebody answered that. Daryl did. Thanks, Daryl.
Yeah, if you want a quick, it's just if you go to support F16, he has a little instructions, and then there's the download to it. You have to update the bootloader first, and then the controller firmware itself. So
Somebody's asking about Raspberry Pi 3 over a 4. What is about the $10 difference?
For me, it's a $0 difference, and I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, currently I think a 3 is more than capable, but if you want to get a 4, the 3.0 beta or the 3.0 FPP supports the 4. So I personally don't have a 4 to try it, but I know Dan debugged it for quite a while and was going through a lot of issues and fixed most of them that I know of. So
there's also a known problem with power on FPP4 that normally won't be a problem, but
yeah, if you use the default brick that comes with it, you're fine. It's just it doesn't meet the standard 100%. Yes.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Hey, to go back on that previous conversation about the 2 separate networks, that would be possible. Well, I guess let me ask you, because with the introduction of the proxy, it would still go out and discover that now, right? Because it go through the FPP?
Yeah, so depending on how you have, if he's doing a proxy through the FPP, like if you set up kind of like I know Jim does a scenario where you have an F16 behind like 4 or 5 FPP instances, and you set up the proxy in the FPP, it will discover those, because how it kind of comes up in xLights, the bridge between xLights and that FPP, remote instance will be DDP, and then it'll then go to E131 or whatever you set it up as. So there's a little bit of black
and
magic there.
You can set that in your xLights now.
Yeah.
Setup tab. I just know nobody's really seen that yet because it hasn't really been.
Yeah, you can put. I'm currently only running 2.7 on my main one, but there is a way in FPP now you can basically say proxy So if you want this to kind of be the remote for a Falcon, you would add it in here, and then you could have this IP address be your FPP proxy, and it'll be a bridge basically between your xLights and your remote Pi or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So just for everybody that's listening, so basically that eliminates the need to add a static network to your network card or router, in case you're catching up on that.
So I think I've addressed all the questions that were in chat. If anybody else has questions that they wanted to ask.
Yeah, Scott, I was kind of spacing out when you went over just a minute ago about your brightness on the layout tab. You mentioned something about overriding the controller.
Yeah, so by default, if you go to the string outputs on a Falcon, you can come in here if it wasn't all jacked up. And you can set those values. So let's go to. There is still some oddities with going between ZCPP and E131 and settings. So by default, and historically how I would do it, is you can set brightnesses in here, and then when you do an upload, it won't override this brightness. This will stay here forever, basically. That's how it's kind of always been. And so so we don't break that functionality, now there's this checkbox. So if you wanted to, you could say now, so if it's unchecked, it'll keep the value you set in there. It won't change this 20%. But if you hit the checkbox and put 100%, now it'll override that value.
Okay, that's so that wasn't what I was thinking it was going, but
yeah, this is a different brightness than from like if you change the brightness in xLights, you can do like your color. In xLights, you can also do brightness on a per model basis, which I personally do not do. I always do it on the controller, but.
Does that compound it? So it'd be 50% of 30% or something?
Yeah, so if you did 50% brightness in xLights and then 30% of your controller, yeah, you would take that 255 value, go down to 127, and then go down even lower than that to 12 or whatever. So that's why I always just do it on the controller level if it's capable of doing it.
yeah, I got this crazy idea that I want to run my show at 30%, of course, but if for some reason I want to do like a grand finale and just create all this excitement, and I want to do like the last 20 seconds of a sequence at 100%, trying to figure out how to do that.
X schedule.
Yeah, the only way to really do that was if you did brightness in X schedule.
Okay.
Or brightness in your effects, right?
Well, in X schedule, you can do a global brightness as well as like an event in a playlist if you didn't want to do it on a model by model.
Could you set the brightness and xLights above 100%?
No.
Okay. So there is a question in chat. Is FPP ready for all these changes?
So like the E131 DDP stuff all works with FPP. The ZCPP stuff is not currently capable. I know it's on the to-do list, but it's currently, I don't think Dan said it's going to be done for this season, so.
So then folks need to use xSchedule if they want to.
Yeah, if they want to do ZCPP support.
Then xSchedule is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions for Scott?
Yeah, I have a request. I have a request. I wish you'd cache in FPP Connect. I wish you'd cache the discoveries of going out and finding the FPP instances. When you're like me, who's got 10 or 12 remotes out there, it takes a while to go out and find them all. And I'm trying to upload, and I got to go back and rediscover and then upload to a different one. And
think it does remember, I thought, but yeah, it would rediscover every time.
Yeah, it goes back and rediscovers. It's just not cached. It'd be nice if it cached it.
Well,
it's pretty
sending
slow.
out a discovery packet, and then it's waiting for responses, so there's some kind of timeout. So that's going to happen every time you open it, I think.
Right.
Jim, you got lots of time, though, don't you?
Yeah.
Come on now.
So, Scott, kind of like at a closing, you know, you provided a whole lot of great information in showing the power of what Keith's been working on, what we're looking at as the future to make it so much easier for people to get started. Is there any final thoughts you have as far as, you know, where this is going, and obviously as one of the developers, and how you feel that overall within the community, what this is going to do and provide for them?
I guess our drive going forward is to make the kind of the entrance to the hobby as easy as possible. We don't want to tell you what controllers to buy or anything, but we kind of almost like a turnkey type solution where a user can plug in a controller and be up and running in 5 minutes or something, you know, and not need to know all these advanced things. So that's kind of our drive going forward. That's why we have added support for like these different types of controllers that should just automatically work with the DDP stuff. So that's what I'm personally excited about. That's what I'm hopeful we can make some of these GUIs a little bit easier, where it'll just turn into when I do a drag, or I deleted all my models, so it's not going to show up. But if there was a way where you could go into the visualize, just drag and drop my props onto my controller and be done, that would be the way to go forward. I haven't started working on it, and it's been a request for a little while, is to kind of make some easier ways to add props, kind of have like pre-canned props a little bit easier. So we had some discussion about doing that as well. So if you wanted to mega tree, you could have like predefined, 16 by 50, and it would just automatically kind of set it up for you. So that's kind of the way we would like to go to make it a little bit easier.
I think it's great, and what you guys are doing is definitely so beneficial to the community. We all thank you, and the amount of effort you and everybody's putting into it is great.
John Harrow, did you have a question?
No, I was still always confused on the ports, but trying to reference the port 3 that was mentioned for the DMX. But I think if you set it to DMX, and that port 3 is different from the Pixel port 3, so that's what was confusing to me.
Yeah, that would be your serial port 3. So like on the controller, like a Falcon, there's the first port has all 4 in it, but then 2 and 3 are the second ports, and it'd literally be whatever you have plugged. So if you have something in the third port, like your lore box or whatever, it would just be that same port 3.
But then in the xLights, setting it to DMX differentiates that it's using that port, not the other port that 3 that some other model might be on.
Yeah, like if I were, what did I do here? Okay, so let's go port 3. Yeah, that's why this kind of control, or the pixel type is. And if you were to go in, it shows the pixel ports. It should show the DMX ports as well.
Did you save it?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I screwed up. Okay, this is what I screwed up. So now if you actually look here, that's your serial port 3, and it'll show the serial ports are green and the pixel ports are red.
Okay. I just always kept getting confused on that port value, and I wasn't thinking of that DMX part, so that clears it up for me. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Scott.
No problem. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
The xLights project exists because of people like you. Help continue the project by making a donation today at xlights.org/donate.